We've got Kristen from If the Saddle Fits, and she's talking about blogging etiquette. Um, we're going to take questions the same way we've done it for a couple times, just using the group chat. And Kristen, you can field those questions whenever you want to, however you want to do it. But I'm going to hand it over to you. There you go.
Okay, so etiquette's a tough thing, and I'm going to tell you a little story about it to start with. It's absolutely nothing to do with blogging. When I was growing up, I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, which is one of the belle cities of the South, and I come from a very traditional Southern family. So I grew up going to cotillion. We started in like 4th grade, and we learned how to dance, and we learned how to act, good manners and those sorts of things. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So time goes on, and I go through college, and I meet my husband when I'm in my early 20s, and I can't remember what story I was telling him, but I made some reference to the fact that I had done cotillion growing up and going through school, and my lovely New Yorker of a husband gets this look of horror on his face, is the only way I can think to describe it. And he looks at me and he's like, I don't have any manners. I don't know what that means. And it was the funniest moment of us just kind of staring at each other and realizing we literally came from completely opposite backgrounds, and figuring out how to kind of put our backgrounds together in a way that made sense. And it created lots of stumbling blocks, and it created lots of little arguments because I did things one way and he did things another. And learning to navigate that difference was a huge part of our marriage. But etiquette, as I have grown to learn, in all things, professional, personal, cultural, whatever it may be, is really important when it comes to getting along with other people and smoothing the way in a community. And especially for bloggers, where we are putting ourselves out there into the community and using our voice and using whatever it is that we are talking about, our niche, our subject matter, to grow a tribe around us, because that's how our blogs are successful. Etiquette is a way of knowing your boundaries and knowing where you can go in a way that is polite and doesn't offend people and fosters healthy relationships. So to start with, I want you to know that etiquette is not something that says if you do this, you violate these rules, then you are a bad blogger, because that's not how it works at all. Etiquette is one of those things that just gives you an idea of the best practices and the best way of going about things. So start off, if y'all want to unmute yourselves, which you are more than welcome to because there's only a couple of you, I would love to know what you think of as the worst blogging mistake that you made at the very beginning. Joe, I know you've seen a couple.
Sure. What I've done, I think that I would always forget to reciprocate to other people, especially if it was something that was very prescribed, like share 2 of these resources, and so I'd always forget, because a lot of times you don't have time in the moment to share 2 things, and you want to read them and make sure that they're not complete garbage before you share them. And I think what annoys me the most is when random bloggers, who I'm sure are very nice people, but just somehow find me and then basically spam my Facebook or my Twitter and tell me they followed me and now I should follow them back, but I don't know who they are, and I don't know how they found me or what they produce or anything. I think that's my biggest peeve.
Absolutely, and I think that steps right into what amounts to one of the most significant kind of blogger etiquette rules, which is a lot of what we expect from our audience and from our fellow bloggers has to do with creating a really vibrant community. And there are some ways that we can advance that, and there are some ways that we can damage it. And for a long time, and it's been, over the past 10 years, there's been a huge change in the blogging community. And one of the things that has cropped up are things like share groups, which, as you guys know, we do a lot of that in the mill blogging group. I mean, we put up daily posts that say, here's, share a Facebook post, and, share, if you click on them, share it. And if you notice in the way that I word all of my prompts, one of the things that I never ever say is, if you post a share here, you have to also share one. The thing that I say is, instead, let's engage in some way. So you can leave a comment, you can tweet, you can share it if you want to. There's lots of different ways that you can engage on somebody's content without necessarily sending it to yours. But for groups that do things like follow for follow or share for share, the reason that this is a very, kind of not good etiquette, not a good way to make blogging friends, is because in a lot of ways you can damage your tribe by doing that. Because I may belong to a group, for example, in the mill blogging group, we have an incredible array of subject matter represented. So we have folks that have cooking blogs, we have folks that have parenting blogs, we have folks that have professional type blogs. We have this enormous disparity in audiences. And while that is a really good thing because it lets us find interesting material that we might not stumble upon otherwise, some of the material is not necessarily going to be appropriate for everyone. For example, on my blog right now, my blog is it's an equestrian lifestyle blog, so it focuses a lot on folks that are interested in horses. So it's mostly adult amateurs, it's aimed at women, so there are some overlapping topics with food and recipes and life hobby or life work balance, those sorts of things. But if somebody had on a follow for follow thread has a blog post that has to do with toddler tantrums and managing toddler tantrums, then that blog post isn't going to have any relevance whatsoever to the vast majority of my audience. And so if I share that blog post on my audience, or to my audience, then I'm going to damage their trust in me to provide them with material that is interesting and relevant to their lives. So that blogger, in asking me to share their stuff because they shared mine, or to follow them because they followed me, would impact my audience. So in that way, it's one of those rules that has to do with, advancing your audience as best you can, and it's just not a great thing for it. And it follows the spammy thing, because I find that it kind of goes along with it. So people who are really, really all about the follow for follow, like Instagram, is awful for this. Landing on Instagram and people following you and expecting an instant follow back, it just doesn't work. And it comes into a lot of the folks that are really super spammy. So hands down, one of my biggest pet peeves, and I think it plays into you, is when someone posts on my blog Facebook page with their blog, and I'm following you, this looks super interesting, let me promote myself. Because they're promoting themselves doesn't necessarily have anything to do with my audience. Is that kind of why it plays for you, Joe?
Oh, yeah. A lot of times I get people who are just not even in my niche at all, and it always makes me wonder, like, how did you find me, and why do you think that my audience is going to be interested in that? Because I think that, like, especially like military specific blogs are a very small niche. So I usually scratch my head, and then I just kind of feel used,
Absolutely.
because I'd rather someone email me and say, like, hey, I think that we have, like, some commonalities in order, or, like, been following your blog and I was wondering if you could do this or whatever. That's a lot nicer than just copy and pasting something that that they've already put on like 150 other Facebook pages.
Absolutely. And it plays into the idea of collaboration only works when both people benefit. And so as a new blogger in particular, I think it's really, really tempting to go around to anyone that you would like and that you admire and who you follow and say, you know, here's what I'm doing now and I'm really excited about it and I want to share it with you. The problem though is that as a new blogger, when you do that, it doesn't benefit the other blogger in any way whatsoever. So instead of that, like you said, your best way is to approach it in the sense of benefiting the other blogger somehow. So if you have someone that you would love to have share your stuff, or you would like your stuff in front of their audience, a better way to go about it is to email them and say, hey, I love your stuff. I would love to feature you. I would love to be featured by you or write a guest post by you. Do you have, I'm sorry, my bull mastiff is trying to talk to you. Do you have a page where I can get more information on that? Or do you have a guest poster information sheet? So there's ways to still do it without coming across as quite so spammy. The other one that I think also kind of falls under the same, it's a good try, but maybe you shouldn't do it kind of tab, is mimicry. One of the things that we see a lot in the blog world is that a really successful blogger will do something like create a graphic a certain way, or one of the big ones I always see is a little instruction graphic for telling people to how to follow them and make sure their posts end up in their newsfeed, and everybody and their brother copies the exact same post. You know, the saying is, you know, what is it, mimicry is flattery or something along those lines. But it really isn't. It's not flattering. It's really just annoying. It happens a lot whenever you have a really popular blogger write a post about a subject and the post goes viral. Then you have 1,000 other versions of essentially the same post pop up. And it's really tempting to jump on that viral trend because obviously the topic is resonating and obviously the topic is relevant. It's tempting, but don't do it. Just don't do it. Resist the urge. Instead, take that topic, find an offshoot of it that is really relevant for you, like personally, or for your audience on a really personal level, and write it that way. Because that way you're still tapping into the interest and the fact that the subject matter resonates with an audience, but you're not ripping off somebody's post. Because when you take a post and write it in a really similar style, it's still ripping off somebody's intellectual property. And it's not necessarily going to resonate with your audience exactly the same way that it did them, because they love you because you talk like you. And they love you because they read your stuff because of your personal outlook. So copying somebody else's in the long run really just kind of tag teams onto their audience and doesn't build an engaged community around your viewpoint, which is really what you want as a blogger. The other thing that I'm going to touch on right now is photo copyright, because it also plays into the idea of intellectual property. Photo copyright for me personally is a really, really big one because I also work as a photographer, so it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. But it's one of those things in blogging circles that not only is it unprofessional to do, but it can get you in a tremendous amount of trouble in a couple of ways. So one, if you are using photos inappropriately, which is you're pulling them off the internet because you Google searched for something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the ability to use it. You have to get your photos in an appropriate way, from a stock photo, a photo that you take, something along those lines. And there are lots and lots and lots of resources about that, and I'll touch on that at the end. But if you're not using them in an appropriate way, not only is it bad etiquette, and it is because most people in the blogging sphere are going to know if you're ripping photos, because eventually it pops up because you use a photo they've seen somewhere else. So there's that. But on top of that, it can get you in tremendous legal trouble. It can get you in legal trouble with the photographer or whoever owns the copyright. It can also get you in tremendous legal trouble from the sense of, or not legal trouble, but it can get you in trouble because if brands are looking at your website and they can tell that you are using photos inappropriately, they are not going to want to work with you on paid work. So you are effectively cutting off your ability to monetize your blog. And the worst part, what happens to a lot of people that I've seen, is that they do it in the beginning, right? So when we first start and we don't know better, we pull photos from places that maybe we shouldn't. We do a lot of right click and saving an image as, right? Because we see this really cool image that would work perfectly for this article. You can't do it. But what happens is then we learn and we grow and we learn about stock photos and we start fixing all of these things that we're doing as we learn more, but we don't go back and fix those old photos. But a lot of times what my bull mastiff is apparently trying to join the conversation. She's talking right along with me. But as you grow, you start wanting to look at brands or work with brands, and they look back into your old stuff and they see these photos and they don't want to work with you. And so if you don't correct that as soon as you can, then you set yourself up for trouble down the road. And you've undone all of that work that you have done over the years to build your following so that you can monetize your blog. Just don't do it. Cut it off now. Does anybody have any questions? So I see Joe. See, how would you approach someone who has ripped off your work? It depends on the specific instance. Do you have something particular in mind?
Sure. So this happened maybe about a year ago. I had a post that I wouldn't say it went actually viral, but it got a lot of hits, and it got a lot shared on Pinterest, like to the tune of a couple thousand shares in probably a week or so. And it was a resource page for bloggers, and then one of the resources I listed was a group Pinterest account or group Pinterest board that I have, and a particular blogger asked to join, and I didn't know her, but I added her, and then I noticed maybe 3 weeks later that she pinned an article that was verbatim, word for word, my title. And then it wasn't the same, it wasn't verbatim the rest of it, but she basically reused almost all of the resources that I had listed. And a lot of the language was very, very similar, but it was like just enough so that it couldn't be considered plagiarized. And then when I approached her about it, I was a little bit angry. I didn't say anything. I tried to temper myself. And I know I probably could have handled it better, but she doubled down on it, that, she just realized that, oh my gosh, she just happened to use the same resources and the same title. But I know that she read my post, because otherwise she wouldn't have found my Pinterest board.
Well, there are a couple of different things that go into how to handle it. And I'll tell you how my personal strategy to start with. So what I have done, I've had quite a few things ripped very explicitly. Like, I've had people be like, I got this from, they weren't even shy about it, just whatever. So what I did, I have a really good friend who is an intellectual property attorney. And so what I had her do is she drafted, I paid her basically like 2 hours of her hourly rate, and she drafted me I think I have 4 different template letters that have to do with intellectual property and point out the fact that this is my profession and I make money from my intellectual property, and that when that this person, by ripping my ripping off my intellectual property, they have impacted my ability to benefit financially from that particular item, and that if they don't take it down, that I will be looking into the option of pursuing civil action for damages. Now, to be totally honest, it would have to be pretty substantial for me to actually go through with that and pursue legal options, right? It's just, it would have to be a substantial amount of damage. But the vast majority of times, that letter has been enough to get the content taken down. And so it's been a really easy, very direct, and it's a very nicely worded letter, but it's a really easy way to just let somebody know that I find it inappropriate and that I know about it, and to please take it down. And for me, 90% of the time, that has worked. The other times, when it doesn't, then it comes down to, A, is it worth your time? And B, is there a possibility that it was just an honest misunderstanding. For me, most of the time, it kind of falls in there. It's very rarely worth my time. And so far, I haven't had one that didn't come down after the attorney letter, that it was worth it to me to keep going with. In this particular case that you're talking about, while it's really annoying, and I would probably, put that blogger on my I'm not going to work with you again list, and I'm going to be careful what I share with you resource-wise, I probably wouldn't take it any further than that, simply because it's not worth it. Because the reality is that you're better served by making sure that your page is better SEO'd and, better promoted, and you can get more ahead that way than by going after her. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it's just, unfortunately, etiquette things, typically you don't have a whole lot of recourse, but it does give you a really good insight into who you don't want to work with. Because people who are going to violate these really basic rules that are really about treating each other with common sense and respect, if they're going to violate those rules and they're going to keep violating them after you've kind of given them a heads up that something is wrong, they're not someone that you want to work with. So she did you a favor and let you know really quickly. So Julie asked about watermarking photos, and this is one, like I said, because of my photography background, I feel really, really strongly about. You absolutely should watermark every single image that you put on the internet. And I'm really super, super, I guess almost kind of paranoid about this, especially with images that have to do with my child. So I have been known to watermark images that I put on like my personal Facebook page, just because it's just one of those things. It's like, oh, let me just, give a little bit of a incentive to people to leave this photo alone. And I'm going to, at the end of this, give you, I'm going to send you all a list of resources on easy ways that you can do this and information about why you want to do it and what your recourses are. But the basic idea is that it's your property. You want to protect it. Watermarking is the most basic of ways that you can do that. On top of that, from a promotion perspective, so much of the internet now is visual, and it's done by photos, things like Pinterest. Why would you not watermark your photo? Because otherwise it is way too easy for the image to get separated from your link. And when that happens, then people can find the image and desperately want to get to your information, and they can't find you. If you've watermarked it and it has some indication so that they can find your URL, they have a much better chance of coming and finding you. Does that make sense, Julie? Yeah, Julie made the comment that she goes back and forth because she hates the way that watermarks look. And I will tell you, it is worth taking a little bit of time and figuring out something that works for you. There are ways that you can minimize it. You can play with the opacity. You can go with just a really simple text. For the vast majority of the photos on my blog, I literally just use my URL. And I just put it kind of, in a place in the photo that it would be inconvenient to crop out. And I rock with that. Does that make sense? And it gets tough, especially once you've been blogging for a couple of years, to go back and realize I have like 3,000 photos on my blog that don't have URLs. That was the situation that I found myself in a couple of years ago. But it was right when Pinterest was becoming really popular, and I had all these photos on Pinterest. They were popping up in my newsfeed, and they were in my Pinterest feed, and they were my photos, and they didn't go anywhere because they had just become separated, or somebody had pinned them, and whatever. And so I looked at it, and I realized that there was no way that this was going to get back to my blog. And so I literally started the process of going back and replacing every single photo on my blog. And it's an enormous undertaking. I've been blogging since 2001, to give you an indication of how old I am. But I've been blogging since 2001. I had massive amounts of photos, but it was worth it. I literally just set aside like an hour a week and said, as many images as I can replace in this hour, I'm going to do. And I did it slowly. And I still have some spread out somewhere that probably don't have a watermark on them, but when I find them, I replace them. Does that make sense? So did anybody else have questions about like basic blogger to blogger etiquette? Is what we were talking about. I know we've had several people join since we hit that point. The big ones that we've talked about were photo copyright. Make sure you know where your photos come from and that you are allowed to use them. There is no being spammy in the blog world, at least if you're doing it right. Right? So there's no posting on people's pages and saying, please follow me, as enthusiastic as you may be. There's a way to approach people, and that's not it. So we're not going to do that. Mimicry is not really flattery. Do your own thing. Don't copy people's social posts. It's one of my personal pet peeves. And make sure when you're in groups like share groups that you're following the rules. So simply asking for follow and share for share often is not the best way to grow your audience in a productive way. Instead, follow the rules, engage in other ways. It's okay. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on when it came to etiquette was etiquette when it comes to working with brands. I know that for a lot of people in our group, monetizing and looking for ways that they can begin developing relationships with brands is a really big part of what you want to do. And I want to help you do it, but you got to do it in the right way, otherwise you give bloggers a bad name, right? We all, I think, have seen some of that. And if you've done any work with brands, then you've run into the consequences of that, which is there are a lot of PR reps and marketing reps who work with blogger outreach who are really gun shy when it comes to working with bloggers because they've had bad experiences. For example, I work with a brand based in Canada. They serve the equestrian industry. They make saddle pads. They make very expensive saddle pads, right? They're really popular within the niche. They are a really relevant brand and wonderful small business owner. She is super gun shy about working with bloggers because she told me one time that in an average week, she receives over 500 emails from bloggers and people with various social media accounts who have decided that they have a big enough following that she should send them free things. Over 500 emails. So this is a really small business. And there is just no humanly possible way for her to weed through all of those emails and figure out what is worth her time. So she automatically deletes everything. Doesn't ever look at a single one of them. Instead, what I did was I helped her to create a program that gave people a way to approach her. And this is where we play into etiquette. So if you are looking at creating relationships with brands and you want to make contact with someone, the very, very first thing you do before you ever reach out to a brand is you have to make sure that you have something to give them, right? And it seems pretty obvious, like if you're offering a service, you have to have a service to offer, but you have to make sure that what you have matches up with that business. So look at it this way. If you are looking at monetizing your blog and reaching out to brands, can you tell that representative that you contact what your average monthly views are? Can you tell them what your average monthly visits are? Can you tell them how many social media followers you have on all of your channels? And can you get all of this information to them in a concise, easy to read way? Because if you can't, you are wasting their time. And every time you do that, you make it less likely that they're going to work with another blogger. Not even you, but any bloggers, right? Because you're impacting how they're perceiving the industry. So the very first thing is before you ever start your monetization, you need to have a media kit that has all of this information compiled, and it's current, and it's relevant. And the reason is because it makes it easy for you to approach these brands from the very beginning in a professional way so that they are perceiving you as someone that they're working with, not as somebody who's bothering them. Does that make sense? I say does that make sense a lot, by the way. I'm not a teacher, and you can tell. It's my go-to check. So that's kind of your starting point. The next thing is on your blog, can someone glance around and figure out how to contact you? Because it is a huge blogging no-no to start reaching out to brands and working on creating these resources, and then if they go and check you out, so they're doing what you want, right? You reach out and you say, I really want to do this, and they go to your blog and they can't figure out how to get a hold of you. And it's not just social media channels. There should be a very easy to find place where your email is very clearly displayed. Pure and simple. If you're going to contact professionals and ask them to treat you like a professional, you have to provide that. It's just a minimum must. Moving on from there. Your analytics are absolutely vital. And by analytics, I mean you have to know who is coming to your website, are they interacting, what are they doing, what's popular, what else, where are they moving on your website, where are they coming from, how long are they staying. I'm a big fan of Google Analytics, but you have to have that information at your fingertips, and you have to know what it means and be able to talk about it intelligently to the professionals that you're speaking with when it comes to working with brands. And the reason is this: if you don't have that information and you can't speak about it intelligently and knowledgeably, then there is no way that you can communicate to the brand whether or not your audience is relevant to their product, right? Because your value needs to be that it's you're going to connect them via your audience with someone who is interested in purchasing their service or product or whatever their goal is, right? And so you have to be able to prove to them that you can. If you can't do that, then you're wasting their time. So Jody asked me on that little track back to the email, does your email need to be on the front page? Not necessarily on your front page, but if it's not on your front page, you need to have a really clear kind of contact or something along those lines that makes it really easy to find. So if it's in a menu bar, like your contact is in the menu bar, then I'd say that would be appropriate and clear enough, if that makes sense. So in not understanding your demographics, one of the things that pops up a lot is this plays back into the etiquette to do with spamming, right? So earlier in the call, we talked about the fact that if you spam a page, for example, like with my blog, my readers have zero interest in how to handle toddler tantrums. So if you come on my blog page and you share your blog post about toddler tantrums, it doesn't benefit my audience, and so it doesn't benefit me, and so it doesn't create much in the way of a productive relationship, right? So the same thing happens when it comes to brands, just writ larger. So if your demographic is primarily moms, right? So moms with kids under the age of 5, because that's what you talked about, then a brand that produces like learning technology products. So things like, I'm trying to think of the right example. Of course, my kid's 6, so all I can think of is things that work with kids under 5. But maybe computer programs that have to do with middle school math, right? So if the company produces that and your audience is primarily moms with kids under 5, then there's no matchup, right? And so even though you have 10,000 unique visitors and you have 30,000 page views a month, those page views aren't going to translate into anything beneficial for that business because it's not the right demographic, right? If you have a really good handle on your demographic, you can more effectively select brands that you might want to work with and move on from there. So now you've selected your brands, right? You know your audience, you've selected brands that they use, you have an understanding of your analytics, you can show this brand exactly what you can do for them. How do you get a hold of them? Right? And I think that's the stumbling place that a lot of us end up in, is we have all this great stuff and we know these brands would be a great fit for our demographic, but now what do we do from there? I can share with you the way you don't do it. You don't cold call essentially your pricing, your sponsored post rates and send them to the first PR email address you can find. You can do that. Willing to bet it's not going to be the most productive for you because it's not going to match up right. Instead, here's a better alternative. You can use the things that you are doing already as a way to reach out to brands and demonstrate to them the power of your audience. For example, I go to horse shows about every other month, and it jives really well with my audience, which is mostly equestrians. So if they don't horse show, they're interested in horse showing. And we know from a demographic perspective that people who own horses stay in hotels more frequently than people who don't because they tend to travel due to horse-related activities. So hotel owners and hotel chains are really interested in my audience. That's a demographic that they really want access to because they know they're staying in hotels. So every time that I travel, and I'm going to be staying in a hotel anyway, I blast it on my social media like nobody's business. Right? And by now, over the years, I've created relationships with Westin, Wingate Wyndham, and Holiday Inn Express and Suites. And the way that I've done this is every time I would stay with one of these hotels, I usually post about it when I make the reservation, because I usually do them online, and I might tweet it, I might put it on my Instagram, it depends. I post about it before my stay, before I check in, and I usually specifically say which one that I'm going to be staying in. And I post about it repeatedly while I'm staying at the hotel. So I take pictures in the hotel, and I talk about it, especially anything really good that happens. I stress that a lot. I hashtag it with things that have to do with horse shows and travel, and I go from there. I've done it enough now that every time, and I'll say the Westin is really fabulous about this. So the Westin, every time I make a reservation, I always tweet it. And every single time I tweet it, they tweet me back, and then they email me, and they say, thank you for tweeting. We've put a credit on your account for a free breakfast. Every time. They're really good about that, right? So because I've done that and created this relationship over time, it's been probably 2 years since the first time that they did it, they slowly started offering me opportunities. So I think the second time that I had done it, they emailed me afterwards and they said, the pictures you posted were beautiful. Would you like to write a blog post for us that we'll post on this travel website? I said, absolutely! And I sent them my rates. Right? And they wrote me back and said, absolutely, sent me a contract, and we were off. And I got paid for writing a blog post about something that I had done out of pocket. And it covered the expenses of my stay at that Westin. Right? So it was a really great way to open it. Since then, they've given me all sorts of perks and rewards. They've given me trips. They've given me free stays when I was traveling anyway. And I've done some additional writing for them. And it's been a really great relationship. And the same thing has happened with both of the other two hotel chains that I frequent. And those opportunities opened the door for other travel-related sponsored opportunities and paid writing opportunities. And it all happened because I demonstrated to them before I ever approached them that engaging with my audience was beneficial to their business. Because what would happen is every time I would do that, after my trip, I would tally up, because I always use, I would use like bit.ly links so that I could see, and I'd use that same link every time that I posted about like the Westin or the Holiday Inn, that particular trip. And so after I got home, I would take a screenshot of how many clicks that link had gotten, and I would tweet it. And I would tweet, at Westin, so excited that my posts about my stay with you generated 134 clicks. I loved staying with you, period. And I would just leave it, put it out there into the interwebs, right? But it comes back because they track all those things, right? Other companies have done the same thing. Earlier this year, and I still do this now, earlier this year, I needed to buy a new piece of tack for my horse. And I found one that I really, really liked. It was really expensive, a little above the budget that I had agreed on for myself. And so I started social media stuff about it, right? And I started reaching out, and I said, I love this bridle. This is what I'm thinking about getting. you know, what do you guys think about it? And I did it on every single channel, and I used the same link. And after a week or two, I took a screenshot of how many clicks that link had gotten, and I tweeted it to the owner of the company, because it's a real small business. I tweeted it to the owner of the company, and I said, I would really like to be able to do a photo shoot with this bridal, because obviously it has resonated with my audience. Look at how many clicks it got. She sent me the bridal, right? So that was a $298 purchase that I wanted to make anyway, and I was able to open up that relationship. And since then, I've done additional things for her. I've done a couple of photo shoots for her. I've done some social media campaigns for her. I've done sponsored posts, all paid work. And it was all stuff that came out of that initial social media campaign that I did to open up the relationship. So it cost me a little bit of time, and it cost me a little bit of effort to build those things into my editorial calendar, but it created a relationship with a brand in a really productive and polite way. It let them approach me after I had already proven my value to them. Does that make sense? Yeah, I see lots of nodding heads. If you have questions about how I did any of that, pop it in the chat, because I'm happy to explain further. Moving on to resources. I have lots of resources that I want to share with you guys, and I was trying to figure out the best way to do it. And I don't think that over the video chat is going to be the best way, just because I have a lot of links that I want to give you. So I am going to make up a little PDF, and I'll pop it up in the group. When it comes to things like photo copyright, terms and disclosure, working with people, contracts, those sorts of things, my hands down favorite resource is Rachel, which I'm sure you guys all know, and her blog Legally site, which when she started that, I was like, yay! Yay! I have somewhere to point people. So I talked to her this morning, and she has very, very nicely offered to give you guys a 20% discount on anything in her shop. And she has wonderful templates for FTC disclosure, which is a really important one if you're looking at monetizing. She has some great contracts in there. She has some wonderful legal disclosures. She has, I'm trying to think of what else was in there that I was like, yay, we need to share that. But she has a great shop full of resources for bloggers when it comes to the legal side of things. And so she's going to give you guys 20% off for that. And so what I need you to do in order to send that is if you can go to blogginginbalance.com, which I'll put in the messenger here in a second, and sign up on the email thing there, and it will pop that discount code to you, and that is good. It's an ongoing code, so you'll be able to use it more than once as you look through her shop. And then also in that email is I will send you the list of resources that I have. Things like where to get your photos from. If you want, I can also include, I'll talk to my lawyer friend and see if she can give me a basic template for the infringement, the copyright infringement that we spoke about earlier when somebody has ripped off your stuff. It's a cease and desist letter is what it is. And then let's see if I can think of anything else. If there's anything else you want resource-wise specifically, then let me know and I'll try and include that too. I think if we don't have any questions, I think we're about good. Did anybody want to ask anything else? Unmute yourself if you want to, if that's easier. There aren't so many of us. Are we good? Okay, Joe, I think we're good then. I don't want to tie up everybody's day too long, but the basic thing that we all need to remember is this. Etiquette comes down to treating people with respect, right? So respecting the effort that they have put into their blog and the effort they have put into building their community and the boundaries that they have created around their online presence. And anytime you cross those boundaries, it's basically an etiquette breach. So the easiest way to do things is simply to contact people privately first if you're going to interact with their audience. Because as bloggers, our audience is our #1 resource. right? It is our value to brands. It's what we've worked so hard to build. It's essentially how we're making our money is our audience. And so anything that another blogger does that impacts how our audience perceives us can potentially damage our earning potential. And so it's really vital that we protect that relationship and that we respect the efforts that others have taken to protect their relationship with their audience. And if we do that, then generally we're going to be safe. Make sense?
Thanks so much, Kristen. That was awesome.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
I think it's something that we often overlook, but super important. Our next Google Hangout is going to be Wednesday, September 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, and Samantha from The Samantha Show is going to be talking about working with brands. So we'll take what Kristen was talking about and kind of expand a little bit further. But thanks, everybody, for coming. This is going to be up on YouTube in just a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.